So I wasn't really planning this one, but why not? I think some of the issues I'm going to discuss in this are not totally irrelevant to some of the things going on today. Um, and what I'm going to say is public knowledge. I'm not going to, there's nothing really original in this video. It's really just my take on it. So some of the things you hear here will be in numerous other sources. I want to talk about OJ Simpson. It seems appropriate. He's passed away. I've always taken the view that when someone dies, their whole biography should be looked at, including the more negative parts. And certainly in the case of OJ Simpson, there are quite a few of those. So famously, he was put on trial in 1994, 1995. The trial lasted for about a year, I think, over the alleged murders of his former wife and friend, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. To many, he escaped justice, and to, I think it's fair to say, minority, justice was done because an innocent man was acquitted. But I think most people veer towards, yeah, he was guilty. Steve Harvey came out and said it on his show. That's it. It's just he was guilty. I'm not going to really microanalyze the case, because I don't know all the details of it. I know the basic details. I have a documentary actually about fame, the concept of fame, from the late 90s by David Frost, narrated by David Frost, and it covers the OJ Simpson trial. There's a number of things to talk about. I think it's fair to say that the context of Los Angeles at that time, i.e. the early to mid 1990s, played a very big role in the process. And it's sort of a paradoxical situation because without question, the LAPD had a serious racist problem. I think what happened to Rodney King was appalling. This was a city recovering from the worst race riots in modern American history. 63 people died in Los Angeles race riots of 1992. That's higher than the roughly 35 people killed during the George Floyd riots in 2020 and other urban unrest before and since. You have to go back to the late 60s to see anything approaching that scale, and I think even none of those individual riots approach that. So Los Angeles 1992 is unsurpassed in modern times. There were other factors involved in that, tensions between the Korean and black community, for example. But that was the context. That's the city it occurred in. OJ Simpson was kind of the black all-American boy, so to speak. I mean, he was charismatic, good-looking. He was very famous. He had it all. He was, prolific comedy actor. He had it all. So when this happened, the fact that you have a black defendant and the two victims were white, it was kind of a powder keg waiting to happen in terms of the sensationalism that would surround that case. Now, the fact that he was involved in, I was going to say a high-speed chase, but it's actually a low-speed chase, famously beamed around not just American TVs, but around the world, was quite surreal. There's been other high-profile celebrity trials, legal cases. In 2022, of course, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, which was pretty big that year, but I think even that didn't come to the levels of media attention that OJ Simpson's trial was. Michael Jackson is another one. But yeah, none of them, I think, are comparable to OJ Simpson because of the racial politics involved. With the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, there was a big kind of gender politics going on there because a lot of the narrative was, well, actually, this is evidence of a woman who is implicated in domestic abuse. So that was a big part of the conversation around that one in 2022. But, such was the attention on this. Apparently Boris Yeltsin asked Bill Clinton about, was OJ guilty? during a meeting. I think it's fair to say in, let's say, mid 1995, OJ Simpson was probably the most famous person in the world. Certainly up there with Princess Diana, Mike Tyson, Bill Clinton. We're talking the mid 90s here. Um, I don't think that's an exaggeration, and all for the wrong reasons. A lot was made of the glove, that famous line, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And he famously tried on the glove and it didn't fit. But as has been pointed out, leather can shrink. It doesn't really mean anything. I think there was far too much weight put on that. I think that there are trials where key evidence is ignored and there's serious question marks where an innocent person could be implicated. But there's also situations, as in this case, where a potentially guilty party gets away with it because flimsy evidence is used in defence, i.e., if his hand didn't fit in it, it couldn't have been him. It's never been clarified who the alternative guilty party would have been. OJ Simpson himself never really helped his case. He had strange attitude to it. I mean, when it was brought up, there was a time he apparently mockingly pretended to stab someone on set. He bizarrely wrote a book, If I Did It, sort of putting up a hypothesis. Many people said this was basically a confession. Many people would point out this was in a pure injustice that this man got to live free. He got to be a grandfather. In the late 2000s, I think it was 2008, he was sentenced to prison for armed robbery. Apparently he went to a dealer selling his merchandise and he claimed he was taking it back, but he did do time for that. But, even if you're of the position that he was innocent of the crime of a double homicide, and it was a particularly brutal homicide of these two young people, the fact of the matter is he had a volatile temper. He was a prolific domestic abuser, 62 cases of alleged abuse. Now, what I would say is, why the hell did he get away with all of that? He should have been doing prison time for some of that domestic abuse. And it's a sobering reminder of how that far too often is underplayed. It's a damning indictment that his fame and wealth protected him. We often hear this obnoxious term, white privilege. I would argue, in a sort of paradoxical way, and I'm not saying this is the norm, but I would say, in a sense, O.J. Simpson had a sort of black privilege. Let me explain what I mean. Because there was an assumption that the system was racist, he benefited from this assumption of innocence. Because black jurors, it was a majority black jury, some of them later admitted that they felt pressure to acquit him because he was such a highly regarded figure in the African American community. 69% of African Americans thought he was innocent. In the white community, it was the other way around. I don't know what the figure was, but there was a clear polarization there. I would argue Simpson kind of enjoyed a privilege. Ironically, there was a racist situation in LA, but because of that assumption that he wouldn't get a fair trial, he actually got the opposite. He escaped justice. My gut feeling is he was guilty, based on what I know of the case. And if he wasn't, there's never been any credible information as to who did do this double murder. I've never heard any alternative name suggested, or if it was like an armed robbery or something. I've never heard. Maybe someone could fill me in on that. But whatever he achieved as a footballer, American footballer, as an actor, he'll forever be associated with this, and perhaps that is a sort of form of justice. I don't know. But it also highlights another thing. Justice must be blind. The fact that, the LAPD had a racist problem was an ugly stain on their record, and it did complicate things because it broke down trust. That's why, these sort of things should be taken seriously in the police. But on the other hand, frankly, there's too much of a reaction from some in the African American community that if there's a black suspect, he or she must be innocent. It must be racism. This was the case. This is why I say it's still relevant today, when there was numerous violent assaults on women in New York City recently, and the suspects were black. And I think there's a hesitancy to come down hard on, frankly, black criminality because of this fear that the police will be accused of racism because of the sort of narrative that Black Lives Matter has spun. I saw a video recently of a black woman basically jumping a turnstile in a subway, and she fell over clumsily. The security guard looked on, and I would not at all be surprised if he didn't want, a mob yelling racist at him. These are serious issues, and they need to be discussed. There needs to be candid discussion about them, candid dialogue without people screaming racism every time. I am not stigmatizing an entire community. I am saying there's a knee-jerk reaction of defending criminality. Now, of course, there's white criminals as well, but the difference is no one shouts racism if a white criminal is apprehended. That's the difference. White criminals are serving long prison sentences for their crimes. Timothy McVeigh got the death sentence for his terrorist outrage at Oklahoma City. So I think one of the negative influences of a group like Black Lives Matter is they have basically, if not outright condoned crime, they have enabled it by screaming racism. They basically take the view that criminality shouldn't even be approached. They want to defund the police completely. It's a dangerous, dangerous proposal. And it has to be said, Democrat-run cities in America are out of control with crime. And I think political correctness is part of it. It's true that America has a very difficult racist past, and it's also true that racism still exists in America. I'm not ignorant about that. But I do think there's too many examples of criminality getting ignored, and the OJ Simpson thing might be the most prominent example, not ignored, but criminals getting away with it because of the intense pressure from black lobby groups who fail to condemn black criminality. It has to be said. Now, as a white guy, I condemn white racist groups. I condemn white criminals. So I wish more black community leaders would call out these people, these thugs, Bloods, Crips, gang members, and yeah, wealthy, famous American footballers who get away with it, as in OJ Simpson. That's my take.